We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Kinesiology Federation this year, and as part of those celebrations, we've been interviewing some people who were there at the beginning of the Federation and have supported it along the way, plus people from the wider community of kinesiology. Today, I'm going to be speaking to Maureen Hardy, who's been around the kinesiology world for quite a long time, and quite a lot of people know her. She's a fellow member of the KF and was there at the beginning of the KF, helping to set that up. Hello, how are you today?
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yes, you too. So you were there right at the beginning of the Federation, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
What was that like back then? What was going on?
I've been looking back over papers and trying to fit together what I remember with the times they happened, and it was fizzing. Everything was fizzing then. We'd been in 1990, I think. We'd learnt that there was an association called the National Consultative Council set up. It became the BCMA, and they invited therapists to go to a meeting. And two of the people who were involved in the Touch for Health Centre, which I was very involved in Bognor Regis, went to the NCC meeting and came back and basically said, we have got to be organised as kinesiologists, we've got to become professionally qualified, we've got to have regulation. And that was the real start of it. In order to belong to the NCC, organisations had to pay £200. And so the only organisation at the time, because the British Touch for Health Association was coming to an end, the only organisation that could do that was the Touch for Health Centre. So the Touch for Health Centre paid £200 to the NCC, had representatives, and because I was secretary of the Touch for Health Centre committee, I started to do the administration. And it just grew and grew. But about 5 years ago, when you had the 25-year celebrations, I sent, I hope you've got them still, I sent all the newsletters, and these massive letters sent to everybody that we knew who was a kinesiologist, with masses of information, what was coming in from the NCC, what should we do, how do you want to do it, what should we call it? And at that stage, we couldn't call it applied kinesiology, because that was specifically for people who were qualified in the basic medical sciences. Yes. So say if somebody was a chiropractor, they could say they were practicing applied kinesiology. But Touch for Health, which is what we were all practicing then, with some specialisms, was for the layman. So the two words were kinesiology or kinesiotherapy, and I preferred kinesiotherapy, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. It became kinesiology, and then what was it? An association, or whatever? And ultimately we got Kinesiology Federation. So we got that far, and then we had to meet. We had to have an elected council or committee or whatever, and so that. It took 9 months gestation. We went from January to October, and we had the main inaugural meeting in October 1991, I think it was. I've got it somewhere, in Baden-Powell House in London. And there was a lovely card, you've got that as well, that everybody signed to say, you know, good wishes for the Kinesiology Federation, isn't it wonderful, and so on. And that was the actual beginning, and we elected a committee, and we also elected a subcommittee, which is the education subcommittee, and that really was, I think, although there was loads and loads of stuff to do to get it off the ground, the education subcommittee was, I think, the really important committee. I think it was Carrie Jost who chaired it first. I think, and within a couple of years, they had come up with the foundation kinesiology syllabus, which also was what had to be done from the BCMA. We had to do that.
Yes.
As Hardy mentions in her interview, she has kindly shared all of the documents that she had from the time of the early days around the KF's foundation. We wanted to point to one very important document, which is this report by Sue Warren of the Executive Committee of the Touch for Health Centre in Bognor Regis. There will be a link in the comments section in the YouTube channel for people to access the full document on the KF's website. So this report explains that the NCC, the National Consultative Council for Alternative and Complementary Medicine, was initially set up to help complementary therapies comply with the new regulations that were about to come in from 1992 when the UK joined the European Union. So this report is called Kinesiology, the Future. And in the first 2 paragraphs, it starts with the following. In investigating the possible effects of European unity in 1992 on complementary therapies, we have become aware of the existence of a new National Consultative Council for Alternative and Complementary Medicine. The NCC was formally inaugurated on October 12th. So there's no year here, but from the context, it would be October 12th, 1990. It continues in the report to say that it is Britain's first attempt to establish a democratically elected body to unite all alternative and complementary therapists. It aims to be an umbrella organisation to give us all a strong and united voice in securing and enhancing our position with regards to both to the British government and Europe. Around 40 organisations have joined so far. It then continues about the directives from the EEC that are coming in. It's about drugs and remedies, and it's about training, but the main point here is number 3, which says under European Community law, all complementary medical practitioners, that's what CMPs stand for, will be required to be registered by a Complementary Medicine Registration Council. So on the first page, it then continues to say, as a result of learning this information, 2 of us from the Bognor Touch for Health Centre attended an NCC meeting in London on Monday, December the 3rd. So again, no year here, but it would be December the 3rd, 1990. The NCC pointed out that in consideration of the impending regulatory initiatives, proper organisation of each therapy should be carried out with as much speed as possible. Each should have a democratically elected council, which should be charged with first, protecting the public interests, second, setting and maintaining standards within the therapy, third, providing a voice for political dialogue, and fourth, promoting the collective interests of the therapy. So it continues. The NCC recognises that no single standard is possible within any single therapy, but emphasises that the minimum standard must be high enough to safeguard the patient. This will be the main premise of official acceptance. Caveat, safety of the patient involves diagnosis, brackets, and training in this, brackets closed, unless the code of practice states that there shall be no diagnosis. So the conclusion, or the first conclusion of this report, was that it was suggested that all branches of kinesiology should join as one association, federation. The report then talks about the next steps suggested after the foundation of, say, the Kinesiology Federation. The next step would then be namely the creation of an educational subcommittee.
So right then at the beginning, I think when we were talking earlier on, there were quite a lot of big personalities coming in. Did it take quite a bit of time to get everybody on the same page, or was there a lot of agreement sort of early on?
To begin with, when it was just Touch for Health, I think British Touch for Health Association and Kay McCarroll in particular used to bring people from the States. There were regular, there probably still are, regular Touch for Health Foundation conferences every year in the States, and people went from all around the world. and Kay and Anne Holray and various people used to go, and Kay would bring some of those personalities back to the UK, and then they would share what their research was really, and so the kinesiologies that they were developing were very different, and they came from their own specialisms. So you had sort of people in education, or people in physiology, or or psychology, and I would say the people in the UK gravitated to, they perhaps went to most of them to begin with, and then gravitated to one more than another. Yes. And I think to me, the biggest difference was that some of those kinesiologies were using this incredibly exciting technique of asking the body. I think it's like, oh, wow, what you can find out. And there was also, I remember particularly for me, Frank Mahoney with Hyperton X. That was the first time I came across this real body-mind connection. He was looking at hypertonic muscles and how we hold emotions in them. And although that didn't take off quite as much, Hyperton X, I think Kay Carroll, I don't know if she still teaches, but I'm trying to think about, you asked about big personalities. There was a divide between the types of muscle testing, and in particular, Touch for Health had been the first instructor trainer in the UK was Brian Butler. Yes. And so Touch for Health was basic applied kinesiology, not asking the body. So it's and Brian was adamantly against asking the body, and so he was quite vociferous about that. So that's one personality, if you like, clash. It's to do with what people believed in, and then there were others between, and I'm not too certain. I mean, I have a vague memory of this because I wasn't actually involved in the British Touch for Health Association, but there had been rumblings for a very long time that the Touch for Health instructor trainer role was a monopoly, and people wanted instructor trainers around the country. We didn't want to, or say we, because I felt that was important too. I can't remember all of them, but the Touch for Health Foundation in America obviously agreed and appointed more than one from the late 80s. It was all round about the time that the NCC was saying you've got to have qualified practitioners. So all this was happening at the same time. And so there were four, I can't remember which order, but I think Anne Holdway, Kay Carroll and Adrian Vos were all appointed. It might not have been straight away, it might have been Anne and Kay first, I'm not certain. They were appointed as instructor trainers. And then Adrian, and there was also Gail McKerrow, and I can't remember where she slotted in, but she was very linked to the, this is going to get very complicated, to the International Kinesiology College. And the International Kinesiology College in the States, it was run by Dr. Bruce Dew. That was doing, I think, something similar, and sort of morphing out of the Touch for Health Foundation. So there was a separation between the Touch for Health Foundation, which was appointing instructor trainers, and the International Kinesiology College, which was international. And Gail McKerrow was linked to the International Kinesiology College, teaching Touch for Health instructors. And I don't know what happened with the Touch for Health Foundation. I mean, that's, you know, but John C was still, this was around about late 80s, early 90s, early 90s. I mean, the group that I was most involved with, although I was doing the administration for the Kinesiology Federation, was the Touch for Health Centre, which was a small group of rooms that we hired in Bognor and turned into a sort of a centre where people could come and learn, practice, come to talks, come to workshops, and And we organised in 1995 and 1997 for John Fee to come over to the UK, and he came over to us in Bognor. And I've just been looking up, and he did, the first one he did was an instructor update in 1995. Yeah, we said, this was our little newsletter, the balance sheet that we used to produce. It finished about 2 years ago. It was going for about 30 years, actually.
Did you call it the balance sheet?
Yes.
I love that.
It's good, isn't it? It's excellent. Because why do you want a balance sheet? Because that's all about finances. Well, no, we've got a different attitude, different perception of balance. Anyway, so the first one was the instructor update with John Thee in Bognor, early 1995.
Oh,
so that's he, and I mean, Mason, he was just wonderful. He was a great big tall giant of a man, and he was just so generous and so easygoing. It was lovely. And then he came back again in March 1997. Okay, and that was to do a participant-centered program, and that was really exciting. That was when we were, I think he introduced us to goal balancing his way previously, but this was no, he inspired everybody. He inspired us all. So, but that's the Touch for Health side rather than the kinesiology, because he remained as doing Touch for Health and teaching it.
Yes.
Yeah, let's put those down.
Lovely.
Right, so, okay, big personalities. Do you still
That's okay.
Well, yes, as instructor trainers, it kind of, there were differences of opinion between them. They came and they did 2 instructor training courses about 6 months apart, I think, in Bognor, and so people came from other areas to join us to do the instructor training. And by 1997, we had 13 Touch for Health instructors in our area. And some of them, like Dav Clark, Joan Brownrigg, Susan Spencer in particular, developed their practice into becoming kinesiology practitioners.
Yes.
And so, well, you all know Dav, she's got a number of strings to her bow. Susan is a health kinesiologist, and Joan Brownrigg was the most amazing kinesiologist. And her daughter has just written a book that I've got here as well.
Oh, wow, lovely.
Yes, and it's about Joan, although that was the original intention. So that it's in 3 sections, and the middle section is about Joan, and how she, well, a biography really, and also comments about the kind of balancing that she did. But she had been to so many different kinesiology trainings, and she just put them all together. She used asking the body. She was so effective. So absolutely, she's the most, well, I mean, like a lot of kinesiology, she's very, very gentle, and she and Charles Benham were of an age, and so while Charles was developing what is it, optimum health balance, he used to come and do his courses. Each new course he would come and do with us, and he and Joan would be sort of gabbling on forever about what they were finding out.
Oh, that's lovely. Just before, sorry, I was just going to say, just before we move on, did you write the foreword for that book?
For this?
Yes.
I wrote the foreword for part 2, which is actually 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. I was quite surprised. I just wrote it, and she says that's the chapter. She'd say, "Do you see, dearie? Do you see?" Because you'd be explaining things, and just amazing. I mean, she has. I've said in here. Bettina asked me if I had any kind of anecdotes. I've got more anecdotes about other people, and Joan. I mean, it was staggering. When I was getting divorced in the early 90s, I used to go and see Joan, and she would balance me, and we would sit and talk for ages after in the early hours of the morning, and she'd be telling me what had been coming up. She didn't say who, but it was, do you know this happened? Well, and one of them was she'd had somebody who'd been allergic to fruit all her life, and I don't know what the actual presenting problem was, but this has happened. And Joan, always so meticulous. She had all these charts which she developed herself, so that, you know, it was this, well, rather like a computer, but long before computer days. And she age recessed this person to age 2, which is when her mother had died. But apparently not long before that, she had been told off by her mother for eating a boiled fruit sweet. And there was this connection between fruit and mother and death and so on. And after Joan balanced her, she could eat fruit easily. I mean, it's just a typical kinesiology sort of story. It was wonderful. Anyway, so yes, I think I put that in there. It was Joan's daughter who wrote this. And what's quite nice about it, actually, is that Janine, her name is, she looks at how her mother was when she died, and Joan went through a lot of personal, emotional stuff in the last few months of her life, which for those of us who knew, she was always very, very sort of elegant and self-contained, and she was wonderful to me when I was getting divorced, because she was, more than anybody else, she was the person who was able to remain detached. I knew she was. You know, her balancing was just whatever came up, she wasn't fazed by it. And, so this is about what Janine found about her family, who had all moved to different continents. And so what Janine found was, what, you know, in the kinesiology manual, she might say, you know, ask if there's anything to do with ancestors or whatever. It might come up as yes, and you just lock it in. Whereas what Janine has done here is actually explore, by focusing on Joan, she's explored our ancestry and how it affects us. And it was, I found it very moving at the end, where she took, that's Janine, how she talked about how she healed herself of something similar. So it's a nice, I'm doing a plug for her book.
It's a lovely plug.
It's just nice, and it was really nice. Anybody who knew Joan, it was lovely to actually find out more about her. Yeah. And I think also, just as a kinesiologist, to sort of see, well, you know, this is one of, because she was one of the, you know, the leading lights in our Touch for Health Centre. Yeah, she was so meticulous, and she was always on the committee. And there's you can edit this out as well, but when we set up our Touch for Health Centre, we'd the local journalist Sue Warren, who was the person who went to the NCC that I mentioned. She had originally written an article about Pat in the local paper, and those of us who were practicing regularly, we used to meet in each other's houses and have somebody come and talk, and we'd practice on one another. And Sue had written about Pat, and we thought, well, maybe it would be a good idea to put it in the paper that we'll have an open day if people want to come and find out about it. And more than 200 people came. They were queuing. It was kind of like utterly bizarre. And afterwards, when we were trying to sort what various things came out of that, Pat Harrington said, we met up in our next meeting, wouldn't it be nice if we had some rooms somewhere? And I knew a group who were just completing a 2-year project who had rooms in the centre of Bognor, and I knew they weren't very expensive. And so 7 of us decided to hire these rooms, which we turned into the Touch for Health Centre. Joan was the leading light in Touch for Health Centre, because she would go off to all these different courses and come back and share with us, and because her balancing was so amazing. But I also want to say about her, actually, after this open meeting that we had at the library, we only had 3 instructors then. There was Pat, Joan, and somebody called Annette Lovell. And they were working really hard. Pat gave about 4 talks to all these people in groups, because we couldn't see them one at a time. And Joan was apparently quite exhausted at the end of it. And she said afterwards, she said, I had to do something about it. She said, so I got my Touch for Health book out, and I went to the 5 elements and I tested myself. So, I mean, that was way back 1990. So she might have been the first person to have started self-testing.
Maybe so.
Who knows? I mean, it's all over now. It's wonderful. But it was kind of like, then it was everything that people were talking about, that, you know, this happened, that happened. It's just really exciting.
That's
really
fantastic. So I mean, kinesiology has obviously been this huge part of your life. I can tell by how enthusiastically you speak about it. What was life like before kinesiology? What was your early life like?
I was plunged into domesticity with my children, and it was it started for me in 1978 when my first son was born, and I had a very traumatic experience, which I didn't know what to call. I didn't know what had happened to me, except it was more real than anything else in my life. This is quite separate from becoming a mother. And I called it my anesthetic experience. And then it was an altered state of consciousness. I started calling it a mystical experience, near-death experience, and numinous. So the more recent one was numinous experience, but I think actually now, I think it was the raising of the Kundalini, but I'd not heard of anything like that back then. And because it was so different from anything else in my life, I had to start rethinking how I was, and I'd been very kind of conventional and very amenable. And suddenly I had to know that this was the authentic me, and I started challenging. This is the way I did it. When people said or did things which didn't tally with the inside me, I would challenge. And perhaps not everybody, but certainly it became uncomfortable. And I've spent most of my life trying to understand. Well, I know I understand it really quite well now in my own belief system. But it was about God. I mean, for me, it was about God, but it wasn't the God I'd grown up with. This conventional me had nothing to do with any of that. Nothing. I couldn't, and if it was about God, shouldn't it be about Jesus? And there was no Jesus in it whatsoever. So I felt a real oddity, especially given the people that, you know, I sort of associated with. Anyway, so this was, and then I had a huge baby as well. He's born by cesarean, and he weighed 11.25 pounds. And so one of my friends called him an infant Hercules, which I think was absolutely right. And I had to look after, and I was quite small really, and I had to look after this huge baby. And it wasn't until I realised, well, actually, because you're like the size of a 3-month-old. Oh, yeah, I'm sure you can edit all this out. You know, all of this stuff. I'm getting sidetracked. I plunged into domesticity, and we moved from London to the south coast. And in Bognor, and Bognor was full of old people who had retired to the sea. And it was like it was ages before I met anybody who had a baby. Eventually I did. Joined the National Childbirth Trust and got to know more people that way, and had another baby. I sort of had to decide whether I could face the prospect of a similar experience, and decided I could. What do I want to say? Yes, and it was, I got in, but I'm enthusiastic. Yes, I get enthusiastic about things. I was enthusiastic about the National Childbirth Trust. I became its secretary, and the numbers went in Bognor from 4 to 200. I was quite busy being secretary of the NCT, and I thought I was going to give up when my younger son was 3. So this is his first 6 years before Touch for Health, and I thought, right, what do I want to do? I certainly don't want to do anything like this again. You know, I'm too tired, too busy. And at the last NCT meeting I went to, somebody said, oh, there's a course at Fernley, which is a lovely centre in Chichester, 8 miles away, a WEA course, Workers' Education Association, on complementary medicine for self-help. And I'd been saying, I'd learned about homeopathy. I couldn't afford to go and learn to be a homeopath, but I was learning on the hoof, as it were. And I discovered there were flower remedies that, you know, really simple. And so the person said, I think it's about the flower remedies. I thought, oh, that's wonderful. This is my new life. And I went this is my life before, up until then, my life before kinesiology. Kinesiology was basic applied. Touch for Health was basic applied kinesiology. I hadn't got a clue. I didn't hear the word kinesiology for a long time, I don't think.
Okay.
So it was Pat Harrington's Touch for Health course, and there was quite a lot of people on it. And she was getting people to come up to the front, and she was saying, "Put your arm out," and she was pressing on arms and pressing on legs. And one person started to feel dizzy when she held some points. I thought, what on earth have I brought myself into here? And it was because it was the first course I'd done in 6 years, because my son of 3 was able to go to the creche. And he was, my first son was very active, and I could never have sat anywhere for more than a quarter of an hour with him. And Gareth was going to go into the creche, and I was going to be able to, and I thought, well, even if it's really weird, I'm going to sit it out, because it's, you know, I'll learn something. And then my son, he wouldn't stay in the creche. And Pat said, bring him along too, he can sit with us. Okay, so I sat in this Touch for Health course, and I've just going through all these papers, I just found an article that was put into the British Touch for Health Association magazine. I think that's where it was. And it was a student's point of view and an instructor's point of view. And I'd written about my experience of this course, and how wonderful it was that, you know, Pat had allowed me to bring my son along. And some of it I'd forgotten. I had forgotten that I was seeing a homeopath at the time. And Pat's view was, well, Maureen and I have been talking about those days, and we've been talking about how difficult it can be when you've got students with very different persuasions. And she talks about me, and she said, of course, Maureen was very difficult because she wouldn't let anybody touch her, because the homeopath had said to me, just don't dabble in other things, stick with the homeopath. So I wouldn't let anybody touch. I was touching people. And so I'd forgotten about that until I just read it. And the other thing was, and of course, she brought her son along with her. And I thought, what you said, brilliant. And I thought how wonderful it was that she let me bring my son. And she said, of course, what you have to do is work on yourself. And I had to work on myself for Maureen. So, you know, you learn things much later on, don't you? I'd forgotten all about that.
You do. It's funny about perspective, isn't it? Yeah. So from that sort of those early days of going on those courses, what drew you further into the world of Touch for Health and kinesiology? Were you just sort of blown away by what it did? Did you think it was maybe something you could use as a career?
We did a special edition of our balance sheet, and I put into that, where is it? Here we are. It's not her, it's a picture, but my friend Hazel Ann Morris was having her 4th baby, and she had terrible backache, and I think I was in the process of doing, or towards the end of the course anyway, the first course with Pat, and Hazel had said, I've tried, the doctor can't do anything, Spencer can't do anything. And I said, well, I've got this book. And then it was this book. It was that Touch for Health book. Okay, that's
the green book.
And I said, well, I've got this book, you know, would you like me to try? And she lay on the floor, and I tested muscles very slowly, you know, each page. And when she got up, she said, my backache's gone. And I said, oh, come on, don't be silly. She said, it's gone. And it was like, well, I've been able to do that with this book. And then the other thing about it, which and you asked about in the questions about, you know, what's your passion? The passion is that anybody can learn it, and you can help family and friends, and that you don't need anything else once you've done it. And even you know, in some routes you can do the courses for free, you know, and because I was in that situation of being a mum at home, we had very little money, well, at least relatively little money, and it was something I could do. I could help my family, I could help the children, and that was where my husband and I possibly began to sort of start having very different ideas, because he thought it was a bit of a nonsense, really. And I was I was discovering that it was working.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I just, the passion, John C. wrote, when we had, where did I put it? When we were moving from our Touch for Health Centre, I haven't put it in there. Where is it? Oh yes, he wrote to us, and he said, to the Touch for Health Centre, and he said, "You represent the fulfilment of what I had as a vision, people helping people and teaching people of every walk of life how they could, with touching for improving health, make their worlds a better place. Thank you for continuing to share the information of Touch for Health." And that actually, it touches my heart. It really does, because especially now, post-Brexit, post-COVID, climate emergency, what are people going to do? How are people going to help themselves? And so, I mean, one thing I would love to suggest to the KF, whether you edit this bit or not, is that I think it'd be wonderful to re-establish the education subcommittee or whatever, however you do it. But there are people who were on that first one who spent 2 years looking at what do we need in a foundation, and they've got all this experience since. So those plus whoever else on your policy board, if you could consider establishing a very basic series of workshops or talks which feed into foundation kinesiology, so that plus people who are not yet teachers or have taught, there are certainly in Wales where I live, the local Adult Learning Wales association, which used to be the Workers' Education Association, they have a 6-week course that people can do, which is an introduction to sharing your skills. And I think that could be for practitioners, that could be a little bit of professional development, but also it gives them the opportunity, if there was an established series. That's what we did for when we set up the Touch for Health Centre. And so we put these little programs out but we had different instructors teaching different things. So, for example, what we can do about back pain, Pat Harrington; an evening about allergies, Susan Spencer; brain gym to switch you on, Daff Clark; looking at headaches, Sheila Hawkes; look at environmental and electrical stress, Joan Brownrigg; how to improve athletic performance and deal with sports injuries, Anne Holdway; stress and how to tackle it, me; Bach flower, we say Bach flower remedies in Wales, not batch. Bach flower is me; power of words, Daff; take a look at your eyes, Net Lovell; and irrational fears and phobias, Brian Thornton. He was a dentist who did the Touch for Health training, and he used it with so many of his patients. So yeah, so that's what we did. That's the kind of thing I think, if the KF could not do this, but bring in, I mean, like I was reminded when I watched Kay McCarroll's interview recently, she talked about noticing. Well, of course, noticing, becoming aware. They're all the things that people need to do, aren't they? Yeah. So that's what your invitation to do this interview has done for me. It's made me remember that and think, well, why don't they do this? Why don't you do it?
We should look into it. I've made notes.
Good.
So how do you define kinesiology when you're speaking to somebody who's never heard of muscle testing or kinesiology? Do you have a way of describing it?
Well, I would describe it not as a practitioner. I would describe it as a touch for healther, really. Okay. So for me, it's we're learning a new language that we can communicate. We can communicate with the body by using muscle testing. I would say, let me show you. I wouldn't really. It's difficult to describe, but I have got a list here of from a Touch for Health class, which was comments. What did people feel after they'd learned it? Which was, this is Touch for Health. Basic kinesiology is a simple, easy technique that anyone can learn. It's something you can share with others so they can help themselves. It's a new language, a new way of communicating with our bodies and one another. As a form of prevention, it stops little problems developing into big ones. It's the magic of working on points of the body and seeing an immediate change and benefit to the body's strength, posture, and balance. The super thing about Touch for Health is that it can be as easy or as complicated as your brain can cope with. There seems no limit to how far you can go with it and how much you can learn and do with it. Touch for Health is a mix of self-help tools that can be used for maintenance as well as remedially and preventively, and it can go on helping you to improve performance, whatever your level of fitness. And then Touch for Health is a grassroots movement which is catching on like wildfire, and we have the matches. And what we did when we became a charity, we had some matches with that written on them. I still got them.
Lovely.
So, I think that's all. And then what we also did as the Touch for Health Centre, we had a leaflet, and there were lots of people doing this at the time, explaining what they were doing with Touch for Health, and we simply said it's a simple system which helps us to focus on health and well-being. While many people use it to deal with specific health problems, it's equally applicable to those who wish to achieve and maintain peak fitness and a sense of positive well-being. When you're ill, in pain, or feel exhausted, your body is telling you that your health is endangered and that it needs urgent assistance. Long before this, however, it has been giving you warning signals. You may feel generally tired or tense, be under stress, have allergic responses, aches, or minor digestive upsets, or have that very common complaint, I just don't feel well. And then Touch for Health can help with that. So we went through all this just when it was Touch for Health. Yeah. My disappointment, my big disappointment is that Touch for Health in that respect has disappeared, the sharing with family and friends, because I think that is, I've always thought it's crucial. I think it's even more crucial now, given what's happening in the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
When we can start to touch again, of course.
Yes, of course. So I mean, you're clearly enthusiastic for it, and you still are. Do you have any sort of stories? I mean, there was a brilliant one about the boiled sweet earlier on, but any of those kinds of stories that you've seen or experienced for yourself where kinesiology or Touch for Health has had a really transformative effect in an aspect of your life or somebody's life you've worked with?
For myself, Joan Brownrigg was just amazing in how she followed everything that she noticed through muscle testing to get to the absolute root of things. And I do think that she made a difference to me. And I can't say specifically, other than the fact that it was a I'm looking back at the dates and things, it was a massively stressful time for me. When we were setting up the Kinesiology Federation, my marriage was in huge difficulty. And in the end, the job that I got meant that I stopped doing the KF work. And I kind of came out of kinesiology then until John Thie came back to Bognor, and I just had to go. And that's it. So my, I'm trying to think, I've continued to give people Touch for Health balances, and I give them balances with a goal. And I find that the goal setting in that very simple sort of scenario is the most important thing. But I'm trying to think, because I've never particularly wanted to be a practitioner. I wanted to make sure that this wonderful series of techniques could continue, which is why as I say, I started off just doing the admin from the Touch for Health Centre for the NCC, and it just seemed so important. But what happened for me was I got sidetracked by that, and also sidetracked by divorce and jobs and so on. It only kind of came back when, as the Adult Education Centre head, I was able to put on courses that I wanted, and that was when I put on the assessor training for kinesiology. And so that was my kind of my last contribution, really, and that was in the late 90s, I think. But I'm trying to think. I haven't thought. It's not. because I didn't think about this beforehand, I can't remember. I have to go and look up. And think, oh yes,
okay.
but I mean, it's been dramatic, and that's the point
Yes.
about it. It's always dramatic, and people
Yes.
always feel better
Yes,
at this
absolutely.
very simple level. All of the really fascinating and dramatic balances that were done, people would send them in, and we put them into our newsletter.
Yes.
And so they're all in there. I do have them all. I don't have, I'm not willing to give them up yet, but it would be a wonderful, well, at some stage, well, I don't know, Pat, I will read out, and again, you can cut this. This is from Pat. We used to have Pat Harrington. She was our president, we used to have Pat's prattlings every week. And she wrote, just another week. It's 12 years since I did my first Touch for Health course, and hardly a day passes when I don't use it, as this typical week shows. I had had an operation on my back and countless manipulations, and was never free of pain when we first heard about muscle balancing. Using the Touch for Health book like a car maintenance manual, my husband had me free of pain in 4 days. Right now, it's 11 p.m. on Friday, and I've just had a telephone call from my Australian cousin to say she's arrived safely at the end of her rail journey to Scotland, taking 13 hours with 4 changes of train. Her neck didn't hurt at all, and she can still turn her head easily. This may not seem very remarkable, but Alison has had a problem for 20 years, so she is very impressed with the power and simplicity of Touch for Health. Needless to say, she's taking a manual home with her. Okay, so that's what Pat had done for her. And yesterday, I had a phone call from a neighbour. Could she pop round as her back was hurting? After a balance, she said how light and relaxed her legs felt and how amazing she found it that she could be helped so easily and quickly and be able to move freely again. On Wednesday, I was out shopping. The lady behind me at the supermarket checkout was nursing a bleeding knee caused by a fall. She said she was having difficulty lifting her leg and was always tripping. I asked how far she could lift her legs, and she showed me. I was able to do some spindle cell strengthening on the quadriceps on her troublesome leg, and she was then able to lift it as high as the other leg. It took about 30 seconds, and I'm sure it will make a considerable difference to her walking. On Tuesday, I was feeling very stressed with so much to do and went to the Touch for Health Centre. One of my friends gave me a balance. My goal, to have enough time to do all I needed to do. Suddenly, halfway through, I no longer needed to talk about all my pressure, and I was able to relax and get on with living. On Monday, a friend brought her husband along. He had had a very painful shoulder for about 6 months, with the usual injections, etc. He had only come to please her and was very doubtful if he could be helped. I asked what could he do, and his movements were very limited. After the usual Touch for Health muscle balance, he could lift his arm quite easily and spent some time moving it about, searching for the pain. On Sunday, I was running the first day of a Touch for Health course. One person who had quite a painful problem volunteered for a demonstration. With a 14 muscle balance, her pain reduced by about 80%. When I suggested that the other 20% could be emotional stress stored in the injury, she was very scathing and doubtful, but still willing to have a go. We did the usual emotional stress release while she thought of the pain and how difficult it made her life. At the end, the pain had totally gone and she was able to move naturally. Her immediate neighbour said when she returned to her seat, "Has it really gone?" All hard to believe, but possible with Touch for Health. That's great. And actually, it has reminded me of one balance that I did with my father in that sort of way. My father was incredibly skeptical, was always dismissive of things. And I'd arrived with the children, and my mother said, "Oh, your father's in terrible pain, he's done such a..." And I said, "Well, shall I offer to do a balance?" She said, "Well, you can try." So I said, "Do you want me to try?" To him, and he said, "Well, go on then." So I balanced him, and then he moved his arms around, and I said, "Well, you know, what was it you couldn't do?" Well, I'll show you what I can't do. So he went off, and he couldn't undo the stopcock under the sink. He got down on his knees, put his arm out, and undid the stopcock. So that was my Touch for Health balance.
I love stories like that.
So do I. And actually, that was what was so wonderful about being part of this Touch for Health Centre, because it was all bubbling and everybody, and it was just great fun.
Thank you so much for sharing those.
Better.
So I think you have an idea for a pearl of wisdom that you would like to do as a separate video. Could you give us a little teaser, a little trailer for what that would be?
Okay, so my pearl of wisdom is not mine. It comes from the past. And in particular, as far as kinesiology is concerned, it was something that on the instructor training workshop that I was on, one of my very dear friends, who was also on it from Bognor, in her presentation, she read out from the Touch for Health handbook in the introduction from John C. And he says, and I cry when I say it, I treasure the Touch for Health synthesis. I see it as a candle lighting the way to better health and living. And I believe each of us holds such a candle, perhaps as yet unlit, that can serve to guide those we cherish safely towards a more abundant life. I hope through this book to pass my light along to you, so your candle in turn may illuminate the way for others. I just love it.
That is lovely. I'd like to thank you ever so much for giving us your time, your stories, your insight, your humour. It's been such a delight to talk to you today, Em. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been good. I think it's a wonderful project that you're doing. I think it's great.
It's really good fun to do. We're really pleased we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.